Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Looking forward to some questions today. So just a quick reminder of the rules. You can ask anything you want. Um, Hopefully, I won't have to deftly avoid any questions, but we'll do our best to answer them if we can. And we do want to try to make sure that we are doing our best to keep it civil and focus on the facts in the future, and also respect the mic. We just do want to make sure that it looks like we'll have a little bit of bandwidth today with the number of attendees and questions that may or may not come in. But just remember, we want to try to keep it open, and I'll do my best to kind of steer things if I can. But we may have to make sure that, of course, the dialogue remains constructive and that we're looking for really looking to understand the problem and create solutions, not necessarily criticize, condemn, or complain too much. But having said that, I am open to all of those things, and we'll just keep things moving as we can. To start out with today, maybe just a quick recap of yesterday's legislative session, which is sort of a big deal for us. Many of you might have seen some news articles, or you might have realized that the legislation that would repeal the Wyoming Business Council was in the consent agenda in the Senate yesterday. It was pulled from the consent agenda, which meant they wanted to have an individual vote on it. And then it was any bill during a budget session needs to have a supermajority. That means it has to have two-thirds of the body that it is being presented in need to say yes, they would like to hear that. And that did not occur. So the bill to kill the business council was killed. So 21 people voted to not kill the business council. Those two negatives make a positive. That meant that 21 people supported the business council's efforts, and 10 voted to push that bill forward. Now, what I will say about that is that we don't know what the sentiment of those 10 are. And I want to stress this, and I think this is important to note. There are some people who want to see a bill introduced merely for the process to take hold and merely for people to debate the topic and make sure that there's a platform. So, but at the same time, 21 people said, "Look, we don't even want to mess with this bill. This is not something we want to do." And I think that's a really good sign for business in Wyoming, and I think it's a good sign that the legislature is taking a pretty pro-business stance, and I appreciate that a lot. Just as a kind of a frame up, we do also now need to look at the budget, and the budget will begin its journey through the caverns of the legislature on Thursday and Friday, and we'll see what comes about. I've been not so jokingly saying to people, it's really an interesting session. Usually we get an amendment to defund the business council, but now we are actually looking for an amendment to refund the business council. So it's definitely an interesting year all around. We are doing our best to provide information to legislators to understand the programs that we do operate with and how we've worked to change over the course of our time. I think if you were to rewind the clock back to the early days of the Business Council, that we're different. And that is not to say that we're any better. It just means that the problem that we're solving is a lot different than it was. Oh gosh, what would that be like? 28 years ago, I think now almost when we were formed. The problems are different for Wyoming. The challenges are different, and we're continuing to work on them. So we'll look for hopefully an amendment to refund the Business Council, and then we'll wait and see what other legislation comes about so that we can again provide the right information for legislators to make good decisions as they work through the budget session. And with that, I'll open it up and see if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts they want to share to get us rolling. Well, while you're thinking of your questions and what you might want to say on the mic, I thought maybe what I would do is just jump over to the Team of Thousands website and show some resources and things we've been working on. We have, I felt been very fortunate to have a lot of this pressure and a lot of these questions about the Business Council over the last few weeks. Because in my mind, what it does is it allows us the opportunity to answer a lot of questions that people have, but also take advantage of the fact that we're getting a lot of attention for the economy, and we're getting a lot of attention for what just does the Business Council do. And in our minds, we do it all the time, so we sort of take it for granted. But I think it's a really good opportunity for all of us to get on the same page when it comes to the Business Council and talk a little bit about some of the exciting things we do, but also maybe clear up some myths, because there are quite a few of those out there. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and in the meantime, feel free to jump in with your hand and raise your hand and let us know you'd like to talk. Because I'm guessing that me talking is probably not the most fun thing in your day. But I thought I would take you to the Team of Thousands microsite site. So if you go to teamofthousands.wyomingbusiness.org or go to our regular homepage and click on Team of Thousands, you will see a web page that has some resources that can be really helpful. What I'm going to do today is jump down to the what we're calling the Mythbusters section. So I'm going to scroll down to that. And in the Mythbusters section, we have put together a little reality check. And what we wanted to do is make sure that we were providing information that would be helpful. Hold on a second while I get this zoomed in. That would be helpful to folks who are working on these problems within their communities, and also for people who are making decisions about not just our budget, but about their own budgets, maybe in their own communities, and making sure that they understand how our programs work, how we facilitate growth, and some of the things that maybe you're hearing out there and that may not be 100% accurate. Last week we covered the 49 million to create only 40 jobs, and I think we've cleared that one up in that those are two pieces of distinct data. They are not connected at all, and the $49 million is actually not money that the Wyoming Business Council utilized in many of our Main Street areas, but those are funds that our local, our state, our national federal dollars were put toward projects in a downtown area. I think what it says, instead of, oh gosh, you've used too much money to create so few jobs, is it says that there are a lot of communities that are willing to invest in themselves and make our downtowns very vibrant. So I thought that was a good one to cover. Um, the other myth is this idea of picking winners and losers, and gosh, I don't know if there's really that great of a way to say it, but I don't think that any of our communities are losers. And predominantly we work with communities throughout Wyoming. And what we like to do is we try to make it so that there a is really not just a level playing field, but there's a good environment for businesses to thrive and grow. And so when we look at this, we try to pick communities that have invested in themselves, in communities that have done a lot of planning and have what I would call a very focused effort around something, and really understand what's stopping their growth. And when we look at it, we want to try to invest in infrastructure that unlocks the potential, not necessarily that provides some sort of a handout or a flashy new thing, but rather something that is going to unlock growth based on the work that a community has already done. So I would say we probably help accelerate growth in communities, but we don't necessarily, again, pick winners and losers, and we definitely don't decide for a community. Communities decide for themselves what projects they want to work on, and we can help with deciding on, what might be the best, but ultimately we want to help support the growth in communities and accelerate it. Let's keep rolling down the list of myths to bust. Uh, so a few years ago, looks like about 12 years ago, there was a program created that would allow us to provide low interest loans to 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 help businesses start or expand here. And actually that it never worked out. The whole project was halted before it began. So that didn't come to pass. However, we did work with, and there was another business ready communities project that was done to build a warehouse facility back in 2012. And here's what's interesting about the business ready communities program. And you'll see this a few different times in our myths, is that many people think that we fund businesses like Cody Labs or Plenty directly, or Weatherby directly. That's not the case. What we do with the Business Ready Communities program is we help the community fund an asset that they own. So the community owns that asset. And generally speaking, we try to make it infrastructure that unlocks growth. But in some cases, a business sort of doesn't want to build it on their own, and maybe the community wants to have ownership of that, and maybe the community can then attract more businesses. We saw this in Sheridan with the high tech business park, and then some of the investments that we've made throughout Sheridan to increase the manufacturing cluster there. The similar type of thing happened in Cody, and back in 2012 there was a warehouse facility that was built, and that asset is still owned by the economic development entity in Cody called Forward Cody. Now, what's interesting about that is that businesses, as they do, come and go. Businesses can thrive, and they can also shrink and go away. And this is the case of Cody Labs. That particular entity went away. Now, that's a terrible loss for the community because there are a number of people that were working there, and it was a good thing for the employment base in the community. But ultimately, the taxpayer dollars were saved because that entity didn't get any taxpayer dollars. This Forward Cody has that building. That asset can still be used for economic development purposes, and other businesses can use it. And so we think of that as a big failure, except that one, we hedge against loss of taxpayer dollars by having an asset that the community owns. And two, now that community has a building that can be used for it. I'll give you a couple of examples of how important having assets available are. In Evanston, a similar type of thing has happened where the business council put out a business ready communities grant with the community there in Evanston, and a building was built. An entity occupied the building, paid leases back to the city, and then that business left. And then another business moved in and continued to pay leases to the city. The city was able to utilize those funds for other economic development purposes. And so I think that what people need to understand is that, one, it's a complicated program. It is not a very straightforward and simple thing like, oh, we gave them money, they employed people, everything was good. In fact, it's a little bit more complicated, but it protects the taxpayer of Wyoming. And what I like about it too is it always remains focused on assets that a community can use to create great jobs and hopefully be able to house more businesses there. Now, we did not own the asset or build the building in Rock Springs for Keltec, but because they had an available property, Keltec was able to move into the Rock Springs area and utilize that and buy that building. I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that having some available buildings is a useful thing, especially in economic development. So again, I think it's important to remember that one, that program is pretty complicated, and understanding it is tough. Two, it protects the Wyoming tax dollars because we keep those in the family. Those assets are owned by the community. And three, we like to have assets in a community because it allows for economic development to happen at a faster rate. And also it allows for more growth to happen there in those communities. This is a very similar type of situation that happened in Laramie. A couple of things about this one. I think this one's really interesting. And so I think a lot of times people think, oh, the company went bankrupt. That must mean that they're gone and that they have left completely. That's just not true. It turns out that bankruptcy is an unfortunate tool, but a tool that can be used by businesses. And as in the case of Cody Labs, because we're not giving money directly to that business, that money doesn't go away. We are working with the community to build infrastructure or a building there that can be used. In this case, it's really interesting because for two reasons. One, bankruptcy doesn't mean that that a company goes away forever. In fact, bankruptcy is a tool that's utilized for companies to sort of get back on their feet, which this particular company has done and still employs people in Laramie, Wyoming. And so I think it's important to realize that that doesn't mean they're gone. Those folks are still working there. They're still contributing to the community, and we look forward to seeing them then get healthy again and begin to employ people again. It's interesting for a second reason, because in the case of BRC, we don't take $20 million of the state funds and plop it into a community's bank account either. Instead, what we do is we keep those funds at the state and we operate on a reimbursement basis. And that means that we don't provide money to a community until work is done on the project. And again, a lot of times people don't understand this. They think, oh, well, they see the headline that says $20 million for the project in Laramie, and people think, oh, well, goodness, they're just dropping money into the town or into the company's bank accounts. But the way it works is the work has to be done, and then we'll pay for it, which, golly, that makes sense to me. I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's the way we would operate if we were a business too. So I think that hopefully helps clear up some of that. That's a question we get a lot. Let's jump into another myth. This one was floating around out there, and I think it's an interesting one indeed, that there's this thought that WBC's COVID business relief programs, many of you will remember back to 2020 when a number of business relief programs were utilizing CARES Act funds in the state of Wyoming. We happen to be the entity that built the programs, delivered the funding, reported back to the legislature, and did our own third-party audits to make sure that funds were taken care of correctly. One thing I'm going to just take a quick jump back in time for everybody. If you were around in 2020, I would ask you to try to remember what that was like, and it's super hard. It's difficult because humans have this innate ability to forget how difficult things are and make sure that we sort of remember them in the best way and think, oh, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. Well, I can tell you from our perspective, it was a really big deal. And it was a very challenging time for businesses in Wyoming. It was a very challenging time for really everyone in Wyoming. But our business community was asked to shut their doors and stop serving customers and do those things for a period of time. That period of time for Wyoming was shorter than any other state in the nation. Our children went back to school faster, our businesses reopened faster, but it was still an interruption. And the federal government provided that funding for our economies to keep moving forward and for us to make sure that businesses were not devastated by these actions. Now, again, many of you will think, well, that's pretty easy to do. You just, deliver some funds to people. Well, not exactly. One, we worked closely with the legislature to come up with programs that made sense for Wyoming and that took in input from all over the state. And that was a great role that the legislature played. The other thing to remember is that we didn't have a program built to do that. In fact, we're actually challenged in Wyoming because the number of Wyoming businesses is almost unknown. Some of you might be like, what is he talking about? Of course we know who they are. We've got a list of all of them, don't we? Well, sort of, but because we don't have the same types of rules that other states have, like a corporate income tax, we actually don't know exactly all of the businesses, how they operate, what their earnings were last year, what things have happened, how long they've been in business. We don't have a lot of that data in one place. And so we had to work with all of the other agencies in the state that have that data, and we had to start to piecemeal things together and understand just what a Wyoming business was. At the same time, we had to build a process to help businesses walk through the process to get funding that for the interruption that occurred. We had to work with the auditor's office to make sure that we could have that money flow through and that it was checked and that it was accurate. And we had to build all of that at a time when there was great uncertainty. And at the same time of all those things happening, we were still conducting our regular business as the business council, and we were taking on this incredibly difficult job, building a system that didn't exist and doing it in a very short timeline. And with all of that, what we found was that we did a pretty darn good job of making sure that businesses in Wyoming were paid appropriately for their loss that they incurred because of the shutdown, and that by and large, this stat isn't true because one, Wyoming businesses are not frauds. Wyoming businesses are honest, hardworking people. 30% fraud rate implies that we have a lot of people in this state that are taking advantage of the government. I disagree strongly with that statement. I also have the data to back it up that it's not true. And what we found is that 4% of the monies that were utilized in all of these programs, and there were hundreds of millions of dollars, 4% was the actual fraud rate. And we found that fraud rate because we did a third-party independent check of the data and a check of the process. We decided to do that on our own. We weren't asked to do it by anyone else, but because we care about taxpayer dollars, we chose to do that. And what we found is that a very small portion of a very small portion was fraudulent. We have worked to request those monies back, and some of them have been were brought back. And finally, those that were not brought back, we actually are working to bring them to justice. In fact, we found a few cases of fraud that made a lot of front page news in Wyoming for a while. And what we found is that by and large, people in Wyoming are super honest. They might have made some mistakes, but they were willing to pay back their funds if they made mistakes. And the cases of fraud that we found, we were able to recover a lot of that too. And so again, I think more than anything, what I want people to do is try to rewind the clock back to 2020 when the world was very uncertain. Instead of realizing and thinking that so many people were fraudulent, I think we need to remember that by and large, Wyomingites are incredibly hardworking and honest people that want to do their best, and they want to take good care of state funds, federal funds, just like we do. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to sort of end with this one. I know we had an hour, but because of all of the questions, you've tired me out. No, I think what I'll do is I'll end with this for today. Now, we have had a lot of questions, and actually I heard it yesterday during the introduction of the bill to repeal the Wyoming Business Council, is that we've spent $1 billion yet nothing has happened, or Wyoming's GDP is stagnant or declining. Heck, I've even said that because that is not necessarily untrue. It's just, again, conflating two things. What we need to realize is that our GDP is so heavily weighted in minerals and energy that it would require an awful lot for us to turn that entire GDP around. We just don't control the levers for energy and minerals. Those are controlled by the outside world. Those are controlled much more at the federal level or even the global level that we can't control those. So we are at the whim of outside forces. Now, having said all of that, it's important to note that here's a look at our non-minerals GDP, which is in orange, versus our mineral GDP, which is in green. And you can see that relative to 2008, we've actually grown a lot. And if you look at 2020, the slope of that line is doing pretty darn well. That's from the work that has been going on from the Business Council in the last 28 years. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't magically occur that economic development happens. It happens over time. And what I think you're seeing is the effects of a long-term investment in economic development. And again, we can look at the slope of the line since 2020 and say, hey, we've maybe made some better investments. We've utilized some programs differently. That's a good thing. But I think everyone needs to remember is that when we are investing in our communities, we are investing in that long-term growth and the opportunity for growth that you're not going to see otherwise. I don't have this in this particular slideshow, but I want to talk about it a little bit, and that is the manufacturing employment in two different counties. In one, we have made significant investments, and the community has invested in themselves, and they have focused on developing a manufacturing cluster. Their particular community has increased the number of jobs by hundreds in the manufacturing sector. It's actually overcome the deficits that a number of coal mine challenges have brought upon that particular community. And so by investing in themselves and utilizing state resources to invest, they've built a thriving manufacturing cluster with hundreds of jobs in the manufacturing sector. Contrast that with another county that has not invested in itself and has not utilized the leverage state programs to do it. And theirs has actually dropped from 100 people in the manufacturing sector to just under or to right around 50. Now, the challenge there is that it's hard to reverse once you start to slip down that slope. And so it's really important that people take a long-term view of investing in themselves, investing in their communities, focusing on what they can do to improve their situation, and utilizing state programs to do that. We see it, and we have the data that shows it's really important for communities to do. And so I think if you think about investing in yourselves, and then you'll see down at the bottom of this slide, you will see that just from 2021 to 2025, we invested about $66 million in community infrastructure. Those investments, plus the investments that we made in companies through our venture capital fund, which utilizes federal dollars, created an estimated $2 billion in economic impact and generated $53 million in tax revenue. So if I'm thinking about this, what that roughly equates to is that a dollar invested in BRC and our venture capital fund will bring back $25 in economic impact. That's dollars in your citizens' pockets. And it brings back 35 cents back to, 65 cents back to the state in revenue. And to me, I'm like thinking to myself, heck, I'd take that investment all day long. And so I think we need to remember that we're playing the investment game. We require people to invest in themselves. We require that communities focus and understand what's stopping their growth. And we want to partner in order to do that. It's not a flash in the pan. I wish it happened overnight, but these things take time, they take focus, and they take the resources that together the state and the community can bring to the table. Now, doing that can have a positive impact on our overall GDP. And again, our goal is to make it so that we can smooth out some of those booms and busts that we feel as people who, frankly, are beat around by the commodity prices in the world. And so with that, unless I have any questions or comments or ideas, we'll go ahead and end today's open mic. I want to thank all of you for joining, and I'll give you one last chance to raise your hand. Marty, that's a really good question. I'm going to read it if that's okay. So based on some conversations Marty has had, that the benefits of the Business Council can be redistributed to other agencies. Please explain why this may not be a good idea. Okay, fantastic question. So there have been, the idea was, let's get rid of the Business Council, and we will essentially take all of the things that they're currently doing and we'll put them in other agencies. That's a really high level view of it. What that legislation contemplated was taking just the accounting activities and execution of contract activities that would be required to do the functions that have already been agreed upon. So basically assuming the work that contracts that we have assuming that work. What I will say is it's possible to execute an agreement and live up to the terms of an agreement by paying somebody a certain amount for work that's being done, or perhaps that is keeping a program open or taking on a program itself. But what happens is when you do that, is you do two things occur. One, you are putting something into another agency that is not built to do that. So you're adding work to an agency, even if you put the people over there in an area that they're not used to doing that type of work. They're doing something else. And so whenever you put something on to a group and they're not used to doing it, it's not very efficient. The other thing is that when we are like the front door for businesses in Wyoming, so the partners that we work with, the recruiting that we do, the business retention and expansion that we do, the understanding of infrastructure for growth in a community, when you have a group of people who is solely focused on that, you become really good at it and you develop what's called know-how. So yes, we have money. Yes, we have policies, but we also have what's called know-how. And that know-how is just an innate ability to do the work. And some people will say, well, that's not that big of a deal. We can just look up online and see how to do it. You can also look up online on see how to remove a tooth. And I'm guessing that many of you would rather go to a dentist than to have me look up online and see how to remove a tooth, right? And that's know-how. A dentist has special knowledge to do their job well. And that's what the Business Council does when it comes to economic development and what it does when it comes to recruiting and business retention and expansion. All of those elements we do really, really well. And so, yes, you could move functions to here, there, everywhere, and pretend like you're doing the state of service, but you're actually reducing its effectiveness and reducing its efficiency. And when you reduce effectiveness and reduce efficiency, you waste taxpayer dollars. And that's something that we don't want to do. In fact, you really are doing us a terrible disservice by breaking us up and putting those functions in other places, because it's most likely that those functions would dry up and wouldn't function at all. And so I appreciate the idea. I appreciate the thought around that. However, I also appreciate effectiveness and efficiency and making sure that we have the know-how required to do our jobs. So great question. Thank you for that. All right. Well, last chance. Going once, going twice. Mic is closed. Have a great afternoon, everybody. We'll see you.